everybody. I'm Chris.
I'm Adrian.
And I'm Jimmy.
And welcome to WorldView Finder episode 19.
Wow, almost 20.
Man,
Hey.
today it's going to get real. Or unreal. We'll see. But
Unreal.
the last week and this week, I've been so excited about these episodes for a while. Because,
Yep.
I don't know, talking about women's issues, that's something.
Love talking about
Women's issues.
No, I mean, last
weird
week,
way to say it.
the Barbie episode was really good, I felt. And then this week, we're going to be delving into the world of wrestling. Don't tune out yet. But just we're talking about reality and what's
I
really
have been
real.
super skeptical of this episode. I've not wanted to talk about it because Chris just kept saying wrestling. We're going to talk about wrestling. And I'm like, no, I don't care about wrestling at all. But then I listened to a podcast that he told me to listen to,
Yes,
and now I'm
thank
in.
you.
And so I will say it is not about wrestling.
It's about wrestling.
It's not
So-
about wrestling at all.
But
so stay tuned.
We're going to start off with a quote from that podcast. The podcast is Radio Lab's The La Mancha Screwjob is the name of the episode. And it says this: I just think there's a part of the human brain that wants to be confused between those boundaries, that wants to be slipping in between what's real, what's fake, to feel that confusion. And so that's what we're talking about today.
Wow.
We're talking about how there's
Want to feel confused.
yeah, there's a lot of things out there that are like, is this really real or not?
Yep.
And so with that, we'll start with wrestling. No, because that episode of the podcast is about how there's a wrestling thing that happened called the Montreal Screwjob that was like this big thing in wrestling where basically it went from kind of being this over-the-top fake like craziness to kind of what it is today of like, oh, is this really real? Are these guys really friends outside of here? And how there's like these moments that when you're watching wrestling, you're like, okay, I know this is scripted. I know this isn't real. And you're like, oh, wait, that just happened. Did that guy really just get hurt? Is that part of it? Why are they throwing that table? Like,
Yeah.
So I did watch the SummerSlam. I watched a little bit of it, the end of it. And,
Like the current one?
yeah, the one that on Peacock they show them live, and so
Okay.
I did tune in for a little bit to kind of watch, and there was one part where I'm like, oh, there's this announcer's desk that has like microphones and computers, and they demolished it. I was like, did they know that ahead of time that all their equipment was just gonna get like
Right, like
they're
is it fake equipment
Yeah.
so that you think it's real and it's
the
not?
announcer's like, whoa, what? I mean, like, I
Right.
can't believe this. And some of the, like, yes, it's over the top melodrama, but it's something that, like, I grew up, I knew who the wrestlers were, and I played wrestling video games. I never watched it, though. I don't
we
think.
had a Hulk Hogan
I had a Hulk Hogan Wrestle
like,
Buddy.
Wrestle Buddy.
Wrestle
Yeah,
Buddy?
that's what it's called.
Do you remember those?
What is I don't know.
no,
what Wrestle
Jimmy
Buddy is.
doesn't know what a Wrestle Buddy is.
Come
He's
on.
I had
5.
the action figures, the WWE action figures, but I didn't know what a wrestling buddy
Jimmy
was.
wasn't born for like 20 years
That's
after
true.
Wrestle Buddies existed.
so wrestling, it was this pillow that was made with this really tough material so you could beat it up. It was fantastic.
It was pretty awesome.
Just a really uncomfortable pillow.
Yeah,
No, but it was
in
made-
the shape of like Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, there was a couple of them, but but I had the Hulk Hogan one because Hulk Hogan was the coolest. He
So
was
you were a true fan.
he was also
Like, no, we never watched wrestling,
I know.
but we had a Wrestle
You had all
Buddy.
the merch.
well, I wanted to punch this pillow when I was angry.
That's why you have anger issues.
Yes, but I also Hulk Hogan was in my Bible growing up. Like I had this Bible that had like Christian celebrities, and I remember Hulk Hogan being in one of the pages
I'm
of
so
my
confused.
of my
What?
Bible.
Okay,
So-
well, you can answer that for our question
Hulk
later.
Hogan is in the Bible. You heard
Hulk
it here
Hogan
first.
is a biblical character.
No, I didn't believe it was in, but it was basically saying like, read your Bible, brother, or something. I don't,
David and Hulk Hogan, not David and Goliath.
he choke slammed him. But yeah, so but wrestling is one of those things that when you watch it, you know that like, okay, most of this is scripted, most of this isn't real, but then there's parts of it that you're like, oh, and one of the examples they gave was that these two guys that were best friends in real life, and one guy was dating this girl, like, and it was a serious relationship. She was also a wrestler, but she ended up cheating on him with the best friend, and so those two guys are squaring up in the ring, and they come out and they're like, "You cheated on me with my girlfriend," and like, and that really happened. And so people are like, this legit happened. So are these guys really mad at each other? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening? And then they start fighting, and you're like, okay, but in wrestling, like, you have to kind of protect the other guy that you're beating up. Like, that's part of the thing. And so you're like,
Yeah.
they're like, everybody's watching this like, we don't know if
there
this
was
is
a lot of the way they described it was so many layers. It was like,
yeah,
they're really mad, they really want to beat each other up, but they really have to protect each other, and like there's so many layers to what's going on.
But and the writers of the show took this guy's pain and just wrote it as part of the script, and you're like, there's nothing sacred anymore.
Nothing sacred.
And so, but I wanted to like ask you guys, like, do you have a show or something that like that kind of messes with reality, like that you're like watching it and you're like, oh man, is this really real or is this not? And I think reality shows are what kind of started our world on that path. Well, I think it also goes back to wrestling. That's why like I always come back, like everything comes back to wrestling because it started blurring those lines in reality TV. Because I heard Duck Dynasty, I've heard from people in the industry that it's all scripted.
Really?
Like they're like none. I mean, that it's not even like we put them in these scenarios. It's like everything that they say, like they have a script that they follow.
Interesting.
As they do that stuff. I mean, Duck Dynasty's not on anymore, but
spoiler alert.
But that was I feel like that was one of the big reality shows that kind of launched more reality shows. I know there was like Jersey Shore and stuff like that.
No,
but
like The Bachelor and stuff. Like those are classic.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not following a family, but
right. Well, I guess there was Meet the Duggars and
the Duggars. I would say is probably the big first one. Like just TLC in general.
Yeah,
TLC.
It was just like that was the whole channel.
So, but then if they're scripting stuff like that, these people would actually say, is that bad, or is it tricking us to making us think it's real, but when it's all scripted?
Well, I think it's more like these scenarios aren't real. They're not happening in real time. Even if it's something you would say, it's kind of the difference between like improv comedy and like having a script.
Right.
You know, it's like there's a skill there.
You're just making it up.
Yeah, and I don't think they go into the show and you don't assume that it's all real. And
you don't?
No, I don't think so.
Not anymore.
A lot of these reality TV shows, but I do think
I don't believe anything anymore.
The producers kind of script it in such a way to make the story more engaging and to make it more dramatic. So you have parts of reality, but then they kind of shape it to make it in its most entertaining form. Yeah,
because at the end of the day, they have to entertain us, right? And so you're watching it and you're like, okay, and do we just dispend?
I don't know that word.
Dispel
belief? I don't know. Nice. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Do we just dispel belief enough to be like, okay, well, it might be real, but I'm just entertained.
Well, okay, so I think TikTok and Instagram, like Reels, Shorts, those things have completely just like blown all of this out of the water.
Oh, really?
Because
we've talked about this on here.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot, I feel like already,
that's true.
You don't know what's real and what's not. I mean, every single video that I watch, I always check the comments, and usually the first comment is, "This is fake." Or like, "Wow, terrible editing job," or something like that, where it's like, if I ever thought that it was real at all, then I like go to it. And I think The Onion, like where
in Babylon Bee.
Yeah, where there's like you're blurring the lines even more, and people thought it was real at first because it's so close to reality, but just like a little bit skewed that you're like, this could happen.
Well, but then now there's Not the Bee, so Babylon Bee, it's a satire site, but it's Christian based, I'd say, but or more politically right-leaning.
Very strong right wing happens to have Christian values.
but they have another website called Not the Bee, which there are actual headlines that you read them and you're like, this seems like it could be a Babylon Bee article,
right?
But it's real,
right?
And so even
some of their older content has actually come true, like where they've like made up stuff on Babylon Bee, but then it like actually really happens in real life, because it's like blurring those lines. And there's a lot of things that I find on TikTok Reels that it's like I send it to someone being like, this cannot possibly be real, and then it's not. I'm like, shoot, I got tricked.
So there's a clip on Jimmy Fallon one time. It was this girl that like does this like backflip under a door and then like falls over and hits this table, and it just catches on fire. And it's like, and she's like, ah! And it ends with her screaming. And Jimmy's like, hey, everybody's okay, because I think it broke the table and all this stuff. Well, a couple days later, Jimmy Kimmel says, hey, everybody, I wanted to see if I could make a viral video, and we did. And so it shows that video, and then it keeps playing, and he comes out with a fire extinguisher and just puts it all out.
Oh,
and
my
so it was
goodness.
all
Fake.
staged. Yeah, and you think it's this girl doing this trend of handstands or whatever, and you're like, oh, this isn't real. And so, so stuff like that, you're like, oh, even the stuff that seems real is.
Well, and I feel like my algorithm is now UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot sightings and all this stuff, and that I'm like, that's a ghost. That's a real ghost, Right. And then somebody's like, and somebody's like, no, I can see the editing lines in this part or whatever. And I'm like, oh, yeah, man.
That's like 2013 YouTube. It was like real ghost caught on camera. It's
Yeah.
like the door opens or the chair moves.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's a ghost.
Right. And you can see shadows of people throwing stuff across the room or whatever.
See their
Well,
hands.
okay, so I wanted to bring us an actual real stat.
Real stat.
Yes, from the Surgeon General's report on why we have a lonely society.
Oh, wow.
So it says in 1972, 45% of Americans felt that they could reliably trust other Americans. Okay, so that's still not great because it's less than half.
Yeah.
But in 2016, that was down to 30%. And that's not even counting everything that's happened in politics and 2020.
Yeah.
Which I would say if they probably did
Trust no
another,
one.
then it's going to be significantly lower.
Well, so last week was the Global Leadership Summit, and we heard from Craig Rochelle, and his whole talk was about trust. He said before, was it before pandemic or before? He's like
In the past.
in the past, somebody had authority. You trusted. There's just a trust.
You trusted first and let them.
by default. You
Yeah.
trust them.
They had to lose your trust.
Yeah, and
But-
now they have to gain it.
Yeah.
And
So
I-
we've switched, and this is just stats backing that up. Is saying the majority of people are saying they're gonna by default not trust somebody first.
So is that as a result of wrestling? Is that a result
Yeah,
of
definitely.
no? Is that a result
But-
of this blurring the lines between what's real and what's fake? And so when somebody's up there, I don't know if this is the real personality. Well, the lady I talked about last week, I don't remember her name again. The reporter lady, she talked about one interview. She's like, this guy was just berating her. He was a famous actor, and she's like, he was just awful towards her. And then as soon as the camera came on, he was the nicest, most genuine guy. And she's like, I didn't know what happened. It was the most
She
one.
wanted to call him out for.
Well,
or
and
just
she's like, I don't know. She's like, it might. She's like, I thought he had split personality because she's like, it was so different between the two things. She's like, it was just crazy. And so, but yeah, so you have, because you hear about that sometimes, there's certain Christian bands they're not really Christian, they're terrible, or these actors I like.
Well,
that.
I mean, there's even a lot of documentaries or podcasts where they deep dive into things exposing the behind the scenes culture that we don't see, and that also trusted leadership, and as our society keeps changing and growing towards exposing or calling out bad behavior behind the scenes,
right?
Then you hear about those things and you're like, okay, well, everybody must be like that then.
Well, I've also seen it on social media. I think it's more popular of a thing where the kind of persona that you have online, to get the most views and to get the most famous, you almost have to play a character. So then, there was an example of, I think this girl was 11 years old. Her name was Lil Tay. I watched a video about this the other day. So she was basically this rapper, and her parents had a lot of money, and she would be flexing all these cars and money, and then she would just be saying these terribly mean things to all the interviewers and everything. And so obviously she's playing this character, but because it was so extreme and so out there, she basically got famous. I mean, the Catch Me Outside girl from Dr. Phil.
Oh yeah.
You catch me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
how about that?
Yeah. So was she playing a character, or was she or was that just who she is? And then now I think she is playing a character, just because if you can do that, if you can be extreme, then you're going to get noticed online.
Yeah. And then, I mean, because you had like candid camera type shows, hidden camera shows, that like kind of, so that's where you like caught people like, oh, this is how they really are. And that's why I think, was one with Ashton Kutcher? Punk'd. Yeah, I think that one was one that got like a lot of, because people wanted to see how celebrities really acted.
Real reaction
in these tough situations. You're like, aha, I knew she was a jerk, kind of thing. And so, but how, like, we didn't talk about what's a piece of media that you liked that kind of blurred those lines, or I can go first if you guys are thinking about it. So, so in the episode they talked about the Man of La Mancha, the Don Quixote. And they talked about how that book was written, I don't know how many.
1600s,
in the 1600s. And how the guy wrote it as if it was a manuscript, like that he had pulled these stories of this real guy. And so it made it seem real. And so another guy that did that was William Goldman, who wrote The Princess Bride. And so the book version of that is hilarious. I recommend that because if you like the movie, the book is basically him saying that, like, he's S. Morgenstern. Yeah, he's abridging this version of the book that this guy named S. Morgenstern wrote, and they talks about those places as they're real places. Like because I think I got the 15th anniversary or something of the movie, and in the book it talks about how they went to those places and how it was hard to film because there was a war going on, and how it was hard to get like the rights for the book because the Morgenstern estate didn't want to release the copies of it and all this stuff. You're like, none of this is real.
That's real.
But they would tell stories about the actors and actresses of what happened on set. And you're like, is any of this real? Because it's like, it's because like Buttercup got sick and all this stuff. And he talked about is Robin, I forget her name, Robin Wright. So he talked about her and like stuff that happened on set with her, like real person. And I was like, but it's happening in a place that's not real that he's saying is real and all this stuff. And so, but the book is really funny because there's parts of it that he's like, growing up, he's like, my grandfather always read me this book and I gave it to my son and he didn't read it. And I was like, wow, what a jerk and all this stuff. And he's like, but then I actually read it for myself. And he's like, chapter 3 is just all these rules on how princesses are supposed to behave. And he's like, it was very boring. And so when you get to chapter 3 in the book, it's like, this was the rules of princesses. It's not relevant to our culture. And you like, and it's just completely, there's no chapter 3. And you're like, oh, that's really funny. It might not be chapter 3. So if you read it, don't yell at me. But but it's something like that. And so there's all these things in the book. You're like, but none of this is real. But he, like the way he writes the intro and all this stuff, it makes it seem very real that he like he had to like fight with this family to get the rights to edit the book. And they didn't want to edit it and all this stuff. And like, I don't know what part of this. I know that part's not real, but like these actors did these things, but maybe so
you don't know what's real.
What's real?
What is real?
Yeah. So that's one.
That's
that
like
I'm
a modern Don Quixote.
Yes. Yeah, it kind of is. So.
Interesting. So mine would be because me and Malia had watched this a while back. Was Love Is Blind. So Love Is Blind. And we talked about that a couple episodes ago. I mean, it was a couple episodes. So we talked about that, and actually on Twitter I saw recently that the people that were a part of the show were actually suing the producers because
I watched a little bit of like is it a documentary or an interview or something? Yeah, I watched a little bit of that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So basically,
why are they suing them?
So basically, they're saying that one, they like after they added it all up, all the hours that they were there, they got paid like $7 an hour to be on the show. And then outside of that, they were just talking about like the manipulation and emotional manipulation that was taking place from the producers. Because basically, they would take the people's phones. They would have no access to the internet. There were no clocks, no windows. They were inside the whole time. And then during the process, the producers, kind of like we were saying, are trying to push the story a certain way.
Right.
So that they would be like, okay, go and talk to this person about this. And then the producers almost and in the final show they only show like 10% of what actually happened, so then how you're represented on there could be completely different of how it actually went down.
And I've heard the same thing about The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. It's just like there's a lot of weird abuse kind of happening behind the scenes,
but it's so entertaining.
And I mean that it all comes back to the money. Like they want
it's fame. They want fame and money.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing too. Another thing that they said is because you get to this point where like you were super emotional and you're like, I just want out of this. But the contract that you signed is that if you quit the show before it's over, it says that $50,000 is an acceptable amount to be fined for damages to the show and a loss of money for the show. So they're not saying you have to pay that $50,000, but it said if you quit the show early, there's a chance that you're going to owe them $50,000.
Oh, man.
So then, even if it's a terrible situation, they're like, "Well, I can't quit now. I'm going to owe them $50,000.
Yeah.
They're paying me $7 an hour."
Jeez.
Oh,
So I would say for me, like right now, I really do like watching the weird, like paranormal TikToks and stuff. Not like super horror, creepy, demon stuff, but like just Bigfoot sightings or whatever. Like, or just listening to those stories of like the weird, creepy stories, like Rainn Wilson's podcast where they talk about those like interesting stories that happen to people, and you're like, I know somebody just submitted this, but is it verified that it's real kind of thing? But I think it's a good topic to bring up is the idea of mockumentaries. Which is my personal favorite genre. And it is because it blurs the lines, but you know it's not real. But like when Spinal Tap, like This Is Spinal Tap came out, people thought it was real because I don't think they disguised it as like, this is a mockumentary. And so I think that because that was like the first of its kind, and they're like that whole like Chris, what's his name that does it?
Is not Chris Pine, not Chris Pratt. He's in Princess Bride. Not Chris Parnell.
The guy that like writes up, he did like Mighty Wind, Best in Show, Waiting for Guffman is like one of the most popular ones. But I think the director kind of started this genre of like people like caricatures of, and they seem very real. Christopher Guest, yes. There we go. But and then I think like shows like The Office picked that up, and where they're breaking the fourth wall by talking to you, so it feels more real of like, oh, these are just real people being interviewed. And then you kind of get in your head like, oh, these are real people. And it kind of, it doesn't really truly blur the lines because you know the whole time, like, yeah, it is a mockumentary. But I would say Spinal Tap, though, had people convinced that this band was out there.
And so, but then the cool thing about that is they actually did tour as Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Those guys.
Right. So they are blurring the lines.
But they also came out and did an opening act of the people from A Mighty Wind. Before Mighty Wind was, so Mighty Wind is like a folk band, so they would come out as this folk band, do their set, and then like these people are waiting to hear Spinal Tap, and they go back, change, and come back out as Spinal Tap. And so, I mean, those guys are super talented.
Good.
I've never seen Spinal Tap actually.
Oh, so, I mean, it's fun. It's good.
I do quote it a lot though. Ours goes up to 11.
That's like the most famous quote of them.
So, but I've got to talk about the rehearsal because the rehearsal. It's on Max, and it's the most bizarre. Did you watch the first episode?
Yeah, watch the first episode. But I think we should break for Florida Foibles.
Okay.
And we'll come back after the break of Florida Foibles. We'll talk about the rehearsal.
Oh, good.
We'll answer a question.
And you're gonna talk about Moon Knight, maybe.
Well, yeah, Moon Knight like kind of goes into this as well. So
it's time for Florida Foibles. All right, so this week it's a wrestling one.
All right.
Hulk Hogan. I guess he lives in Florida. That's why I don't know. But he's getting married again
for him.
For the third time.
Oh, okay.
People are surprised because when they saw him with this, it's his 45-year-old yoga instructor, and he's like 90 and made out of shoe leather. But he like, no, he's not 90, but
he looks like it.
But people were like, what? I didn't know he divorced his second wife. So people were like, what is he doing with this girl? But he's like, his fans are called maniacs. He's like, hey, maniacs, don't worry. I'm divorced and all this stuff. So, but here's
don't worry, I'm divorced.
So here's what he says about his third marriage. I've been with my girl Sky for a while. I'm trying to read my best Hulk Hogan.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very good.
And everything that I've had happen in my life, both of my two marriages, everything bad that's ever happened to me had to do with alcohol. Stay off alcohol, brother. But that was I thought it was interesting because now he can be in my Bible. No,
Your Bible was like, hey, this alcoholic man,
yeah.
let's put him in.
And Hulk Hogan had his own reality show.
Yeah.
Is it called The Hogans? Yeah, and I think a lot of bad things came out of it.
This is probably true.
His son got addicted to drugs or something. I don't know. But yeah, but it was, but I thought that was interesting because he kind of like, hey, yeah, I've had some bad things happen in my life, and he's like, it's all because of alcohol. Because when you look at Hulk Hogan, you're like, man, this guy, because I feel like he's one of the reasons wrestling became what it was, because he was the guy, and he's still, I mean, people still. Well, I mean, obviously, he has a big following.
Maniacs.
I mean, Hulkmania was the thing. Like, they called it Hulkmania. Like, that was one of the big things and all that stuff. If you are big into wrestling, Peacock is the place, is the thing, because they have, you can go back and watch all the Royal Rumbles from the very first one. I want to do that with my son.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
But I just thought it was interesting because we're talking about wrestling. And you're like, okay, is this marriage? Is this real?
Is this marriage real? We'll never know.
He's just playing character. He's got to stay relevant.
Yeah.
This is a 45-year-old yoga instructor. So, Sky. She sounds like a yoga instructor. So,
nice.
Okay, we're back with blurring the lines.
Okay,
blurred lines. No, we should not talk about that song. No. Well, so the question is, what is something you believed as a child that you found out was untrue?
So we're not just talking about like Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy or Easter.
More like just specific
like
to
things
us.
that were like that you grew up thinking. So okay, I can't think of one for me. I got to think about it. But there was a guy at church one time that came up to me. I don't remember why I had preached, and he came up and was like, "Oh," he started telling me the story where when he was a kid, his like. Somebody in his family had passed away, and so he's at the funeral. He's like 5 or something, and so he's like there at the showing, and his like aunt comes in and is like just weeping, and she runs up to the casket and like no, and like touches the person, but then like passes out. Well, he thought that she died. So she like because it was somebody that wasn't close. So like she falls over. They like everybody rushes to her. They carry her out of the room. Well, like in his mind, like she touches a dead body and then dies. And so in his brain, and he said, I believe this up until like high school. He's like, I thought that if you touched a dead body, that you would like God would strike you down. Yeah. And so he's like, I didn't know that until like, and then he's like, I found out she was still alive, and I was like, wait, she died? He's like, no, she just passed out. He's like, oh, like it was like one of the, those ants that you never see or whatever. And so in his brain, he believed for a long time that you touch a dead body that you'll die.
Oh my goodness,
it makes sense.
I know, but I thought it was really funny.
That is weird. Mine was, I don't remember how I started believing this, but I believe that you weren't allowed to, or you shouldn't take a shower during a lightning storm because you could get struck by lightning.
Oh yeah,
but that's true.
It's still unadvisable.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a real thing.
You can get struck by lightning in the shower?
Because water is a conductor of electricity, so if your house gets hit by lightning,
it's going to shoot lightning out of the shower.
Yeah.
It's Emperor Palpatine's.
Wait, so now I don't even know if it's true or not. Okay.
It's real.
This is the purpose of this.
Well, this reminds me though. Snopes is one of those things that like, is this real or not? You go to Snopes, but then I've heard that Snopes isn't real.
What?
I've heard that sometimes that Snopes isn't always factual. So I was like, what?
How?
The truth is not out
There's no truth anywhere anymore. I feel like they were quick things or what?
Yeah. Okay. Good. I've thought.
Well, Chris here told me that there were sharks under the drains in deep ends of pools.
It's true.
So I was very terrified to go. Like, I would still swim in the deep end, but I would never
go down the drain. You can see the
dive
for
the
shark eye looking out.
Yeah, dive for rings or anything like that because I was afraid I'd see a shark.
That's another one that is actually true. We found it. That one's actually true.
So I still feel like, well, it might just be the fact that it's deep water, but I just feel like I am scared of pool drains.
Nice.
So, it wasn't something I believed for a long time, but it was. Our mom would on occasion be like, I think we're being followed.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
But okay, so one time I went to a grocery store. I got it It was something like you know, like the box tops, you get like points for them now or whatever. They used to be like store receipts or something. So I went in this grocery store. It was before third grade because we moved here in third grade. And this happened in Winston-Salem. And so I was either second or third grade. And I went into this grocery store by myself. It was at night. And I was supposed to ask for a thing of receipts.
The 80s were wild.
Yeah, I couldn't find anybody to help me, so I found the stack and I just took them. And so I was like, these are just sitting out here. So I got in the car and we're going. And my mom was like, they just gave you all those? I was like, no, they were just sitting there. And she's like, you stole them? I was like, no, they were just sitting out. I think they were going to be thrown away. And she's like, oh no, that's why that car is sticking out back there. Because they're following us. I was like, what? And so like we were in this line of traffic and there was one car that like you could see its headlights sticking out. Like it was over just a little bit. She's like, oh man, I didn't think. I was wondering why that car was following us. And so we pull into our neighborhood and she like speeds, like, so you go down the hill, turn right, and then pulled in our driveway. She shuts the lights off and like, duck down. And so we sit there for a minute or two and the car drove by. She's like, okay, that's them. All right, they didn't see us. It's like, hurry, get inside. And so we run inside. Never told me that wasn't real. Like I'm like believing this whole time that the police are gonna like track me down because I stole these receipts in the store.
And the correct response is to get away from them fast and hide from the police.
Yeah, exactly. Like, or these people that are after me.
Yeah, the people are after us. Yeah, Jeez. She would do that all the time. Like if she noticed a car, or she might recognize it like somebody from our neighborhood or something, and she'd be like, I think they're following us. And then it would be like this long drive where they're actually like coming into our neighborhood. Oh my goodness. Yeah. We'd be like,
she's like, we can't pull in our house. We'll know where we live. And like we'd go around the neighborhood.
Yeah, she'd drive around the blocks.
Why was this a thing?
It was terrifying. It was terrifying. She does it to our kids now too, the grandkids.
Oh, does she?
Because Amos will be like, is that car following us? I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's my favorite. Oh my God. She did that to my brother and his friend one time because they were going out to this. It was like a church event, but it was really far out in the country. And so she's like, I think that car's following. And like the friend was getting really nervous. But she would never say, I'm just joking. Like that was the thing. Like it was never.
Can't break character.
Like, I know.
She's committed. I respect that.
She should be committed. Oh man, it was so funny.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, as an adult now, I'm like, that's pretty funny.
That is funny, but also terrifying.
But okay, let's go back to the rehearsal for a moment, because so that show, it's about helping people rehearse for life events that are going to be like important in their life or whatever. Yeah. And so I think we've talked about the first episode before.
We have.
But the premise is this guy, he's going to go tell his friends at this trivia night that he doesn't have a master's degree, and they believe that he has. And if you watch it, you're like, that doesn't seem like a big deal. But he's lied for a long time. Yeah. And they're sending him all this stuff. He's like, I'm afraid that if I tell him this now, they're going to be like, why didn't you tell us this at the beginning? Yeah. Why did you let us believe this for this long? And they're going to be mad. And one lady in particular, he's like, she's going to flip him off,
probably
flip
too.
out and like say things that are so hurtful that we'll never be friends again. I'll have to leave my group, which is like his community basically. But the show, I will spoil a little bit of the first episode because the guy, Nathan Fielder, like designs this guy's apartment and rehearses what he's going to say to this guy over and over. He ends up building the set of the bar that they're going to have their trivia night in, like down to the last detail. Like like the ripped seats, the weird Mylar balloon, happy face balloon floating in the corner. Like every detail is exact. Mm-hmm. And then that bar becomes like it's so funny. Like later on.
It's a reoccurring character.
It is. But you watch it and you're like, okay, this is interesting, all this stuff. But then as it gets further into the show, you're like, is Nathan Fielder for real? Because that guy is crazy. Like as it gets into it, you're like, I don't know what to believe anymore. Because like the things that he sets up to help these people rehearse for things, you're like, I don't know. And then he like gets in these weird existential things in his own brain because they do this thing where like he's trying to help this lady feel like what it's like to have kids or whatever. And she's like a crazy Christian, like one of the weirdos. And she's like, I'm going to raise my kid to be a Christian and all this stuff. And so he invites his parents over, his real life parents, and they have like a picnic together. And they're like, we're going to raise our kid as a Christian. And the mom like pulls him aside. It's like, you're Jewish. You need to raise him to be Jewish. And he's like, why was my mom so upset about this fake kid that we're not even, like, it's not real.
Yeah.
But, like, she's upset about this. And then he's like, well, and then it, like, became like, oh, well, because this is how I am in relationships. I, like, leave a lot, and I'm not committed, and I just let the people in my life walk over me and all this stuff. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to raise this kid to be Jewish. So then he's, like, secretly taking this kid to
very weird
to Jewish classes and all this stuff. You're like, what is happening? But then this is where, like, the reality stuff breaks down, because it's child actors, and then when they're done with their, like, acting stuff, the parents are like, hey, you need to tell them that, like, Christianity is the real way, because, like, the parents were Christian of this kid. And so he's like, hey, you're fine because you're a Christian, you're going to heaven, I'm going to hell because I don't believe that. Like,
my goodness.
He's like, so you're right, I'm wrong, so follow Jesus or whatever. And he's like, but like I don't want to spoil stuff, but, like, the last episode is this kid that, like, doesn't know what's real because he's been in this acting situation with this guy, and he doesn't have a good father figure, and Nathan's been this dad to him in this scenario that they're acting in. And so the mom is like, hey, he's, like, really attached to you now and stuff. And so he has to, like, figure out how to not make this kid like him. And it's the weirdest, most bizarre. You're like, what is this even?
Oh, man.
And it ends, and you're like, I mean, like, I almost cry. Like, it is, that show is a roller coaster, man. And it deals with some deep stuff. You're like, what is happening? There are swears in the show, so but it deals with really heavy topics at times, and you're like, I was not expecting this from this comedy show. I don't even know what kind of show it is. It's not like anything I've ever seen.
I also realized that because Chris
watched it twice.
Before I watched it, Chris had been probably the 3 months prior, like, all the time just talking about it. And I realized with the show, because it's so weird and complex, if anyone tries to describe what happens, like, I'm sure anyone listening for the last 2 minutes, just imagine it doesn't make any sense at all.
No.
So
you just have to watch
it
to
for yourself,
know.
and then it will make more sense, because trying to describe it is almost impossible.
Again, we're not recommending this.
Not recommending it.
But I kind of look up the content on it before you watch it. But but it is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. Like, it is.
It was very weird, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. So we watched it twice, and I watched it
binge
again.
watch it, which I couldn't, because I would watch an episode and have to, like, process for the whole entire week.
Yeah, it's 6 episodes.
Okay, well, all right. So I think this is a good segue into, like, what's the worldview of this?
Yes.
Oh.
Of this culture, or this, I don't know if it's like a dilemma that at least Americans face of untrustworthiness or living in the blurred lines. Like, I think it's good to bring up that quote again from that you said at the beginning. Let's read it one more time.
think there's a part of the human brain that wants to be confused between those boundaries, that wants to be slipping in between what's real, what's fake, to feel the confusion.
Okay, so where can we find real truth?
So one of the worldview, I've been listening to the Universe Next Door, which is it's about worldview, like all the different worldviews. And so naturalism is just like things are. Like, it's just everything happened naturally. And so there's not an outside force, there's not a God, there's not anything. Like, it's just the natural world, what I can see, all that stuff, that's what's real and all that stuff. And so I think, but there's a Bible verse that talks about that God has put eternity into the hearts of men. And so I think there's this thing, like, that if you don't believe in God, there's this wrestling with what is really real, because I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. But it's that idea of, like, I want to feel something real in life. And so if everything just happened and there's no purpose or reason behind it, so naturalism leads to what's called nihilism, where it's just like nothing is real. And then you get into this really weird, one of the examples in the book is like, this guy's like, when I go to parties and there's, like, this guy that's like, he's like, I don't know what's real. He's like, is this room real? Probably not. Am I even real? I don't know. And the guy will say, hey, your fly's open. And he's like, they immediately look down. He's like, okay, you believe that there's something more than just what, because you were, like, nervous, you're going to be embarrassed. And, like, he's like, you don't believe what you're telling me.
Well, yeah. So I've heard that. So actually I was, because we've talked about Alex Ramosi on the podcast before, or I have, and I learned a little bit of his backstory, how he used to be a Christian. And then over this, like, 5-year-long process of trying to figure things out, he actually is now a nihilist. So he said kind of how he describes himself now is just, in a nutshell, there's no capital M meaning. So everything, there's no real meaning in life, but he said for him, he can attribute meaning to whatever he wants to. So he's like, I do this because I find it meaningful, but that doesn't mean there is any kind of meaning to all of this.
Ooh, see, that's a dangerous play, because if you play
that's
that
really
out,
dangerous. Yeah,
because that's the thing with like all the other worldviews that aren't the Christian worldview, theistic worldview. So because it leads to I can just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Because if there's no reality, if there's nothing that's really real, then whatever I want to do, that's what's real. And so it doesn't matter who it hurts. And then you're like, well, there's still good and evil. And like, well, okay, well, then that just goes against what you just said, because now there's some kind of moral thing. Well, where does that come from? That means there's a moral lawgiver. And so
so that's why we always encourage, like, play out the worldview that is being pushed on you to see like how far it goes. Or another question I like to ask is, can everybody live this way? Like, what if everyone thought this way? Then would the world erupt into chaos, basically? Like, what would that do? But I almost feel like the way that, at least what I see with like do aliens exist, or does the paranormal exist, or whatever, is it's more like
real.
Maybe more like Gnosticism is the leading.
Like there's a secret.
There's something spiritual out there, but you just don't know. Like you'll never know. That's kind of the thing behind it, is like, I would guess that there could be a higher power, but we'll just never really know.
That's not Gnosticism. That's not atheist. What's the other one?
Agnostic.
Agnostic. That's what I mean. Sorry.
Agnostic.
Agnostic was Gnosticism.
Gnosticism is like there's like a secret that only these people know, and you're like,
oh, okay, no,
like
agnostic. Yes,
agnostic. Yeah, there's like, there's something out there.
Yeah,
but that's where like that struggle is of like, I want to know what's really real, and that's why I think people why wrestling is bigger than it's ever been, is because people want to know, like, is this really real or not? And I know most of it's not, and they can't talk about it because that's one of the things you can't talk about it. But don't talk about the Fight Club. But but it's like, I know this is real. Or no, it's not real, but there are some things that are real about it. And I think that translates into our life. Like, we know that like a lot of the stuff that we deal with on a daily basis is fake or whatever. And I think that's why the 2016 election was so crazy, is because people didn't really know like what was real with Trump. Because it's like, okay, this guy was on wrestling.
That's true.
He does reality shows. He knows how to get ratings. Yeah. And so... Yeah. So he would like, and that's when he wasn't in the news anymore. People were like, oh, we don't know what to talk about. Talking about Biden falling for the 5th time, but it's like we don't know because he was always in the news cycle, and I think for him it's like there's no such thing as bad press. Like, he doesn't care. Like, he just is like, I'm going to dominate the news cycle. And now that the 2024 election's ramping back up, he's back in the news. But he's entertaining, and he knows how to be entertaining. He knows how to get the reviews and ratings and all that stuff. And so you're like,
in the podcast, it was talking about the difference between what wrestling was then and what it is now. Is that a lot of these characters, like I was saying with the social media stars, is like The Rock was kind of his base character, just amplified by 1,000%.
Yeah.
Or Stone Cold Steve Austin was
Stone Cold,
but he was amplified by 1,000%. So you play this extreme character, and then that's what makes it more entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's so and that's what I feel like Trump is like. Is he really real? Like, I don't know. Yeah, I've heard he's like.
Quick, so how do you live in that? How do we live in our reality right now? Is there a reality? Okay, so here's something interesting though.
You tell us
again. Okay, there's a research center called Barna, and they do some pretty big studies. So they released a report, I think, earlier this year that said there's a rise of spiritual openness. So these are numbers that are way higher than I would have expected, but 74% of U.S. adults say that they want to grow spiritually. 77% say that they do believe in a higher power.
Oh.
So people are spiritually open.
Yeah.
It's not that they're rejecting that there is nothing out there, but how do we direct people towards truth, or how do we know where to even find truth?
Well, I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier. Like, if you played this worldview out, if everybody lived like this, what would happen as a result? And so I think that's where the spiritual like rise is on like coming back, because people are like, the way I'm living isn't great.
Yeah.
Like this, like not knowing what's true and what's not, and like just living in this kind of like, oh, is this real? Is this person really like this or what? Like, when you get rid of all that stuff, it comes down to like, okay, do I know that Jesus loves me and died for me and all that? And when I take that in, then I'm like, okay, he's what gives me value and meaning and purpose, and like all these other things that I'm trying to find it in that aren't working, or I don't even know if they're real or not.
Yeah.
Like, that's where it's like, okay, I've got to get rid of that so that I can really focus on what really matters and what's really important. And then outside of that, like, okay, it's fun to conspiracy theories and all that stuff, but I know at the end, like, it has to be grounded in the Word of God. Otherwise, it's not true.
Yeah. And I think there's this, I think when people are saying like, I'm going to live my best life, that whole, like, it's not working out for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're saying like, I can't actually live for myself.
Right.
I have to, whenever I am serving or being selfless or focusing on others or even living for like my purpose and meaning comes from a higher power like Jesus, then that's more fulfilling than living for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think people are starting to realize that.
What is interesting, and I think I see this with my generation and people that are younger, is I believe in older generations, this, because we're talking about in wrestling, this search for absolute truth, like going through and searching for absolute truth. And I think that's becoming less common of a thing that people want to do. Like, and like, I'm sure there's a lot of people where they are less interested in what is the absolute truth rather than, well, I'm just going to do what works for me. I don't, if that is true or if that works for you, good for you, but I'm just going to do what works for me. I'm not really interested in searching for what's absolute truth. And I think that's different compared to other generations. So a lot of people just aren't even interested in an absolute truth.
Ooh. But why?
Because they're more focused on just doing something that works for them.
Okay. So like, there may be something out there, but right now I'm just going to do what helps me. But I think that's what you were getting at. Like, like when they get to the end of that, of like, okay, this isn't working out for me. That's when they maybe start the search.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of, I mean, before I was a Christian, it wasn't like I was thinking about these ideas all the time. It's like, you know, you just woke up, you went to school, you played video games, went to sleep. Like, that's just not something that crossed your mind. Yeah. And it like reminds me of like Mr. Beast, where he's, because he said, you know, those kind of questions are something I'll worry about when I'm like 80. Yeah. But for now, I'm just going to put all of my focus and attention on doing this thing for the next 30 years. And then I think you can do something and focus on it solely for 30 years. And then maybe you wake up after that, if you're lucky, and you're like, oh, wait, is there something more to life?
But you missed all that.
No, I know. That's the
years,
point. But a lot of people, they can just distract them with what's right in front of them, and they never have these conversations.
So there was a documentary that I watched, and it talks about like the seeker-friendly Christianity and how like we're seeing millennials leave the church in droves because millennials were the ones that kind of started that hopping around like, I'm spiritual, and so I'm going to try Buddhism, and it's not working. I'm going to try this, and it's not working. I'm going to try this. And because Christianity became seeker-friendly, it was just another path to try, because it was like this appealing, like, Jesus is a good guy. And people are... Boy. Well, yeah, and people, again, like this Barna study also talks about people being really open to Jesus, but not the church necessarily. So it's like, he's just another like really good guy to like, okay, can I follow his teachings? And then eventually they kind of like, oh, I'm going to move on. You know, there's crappy people that that are Christians, so I'm going to whatever. But the churches that retain millennials are the ones that are actually preaching like sin and you know, like repentance and
that is interesting.
Dying to yourself, because it's like, no, you have a problem that you're gonna need to address, not just like it's okay to live a good life.
Yeah, and our Pastor Brett, he was talking about that in a sermon yesterday. He was talking about, and I forget exactly what the quote was, but it was essentially like, we don't clothe Christianity. We clothe Christianity in modern terms, but we don't take modern ideas and then clothe it in Christian terms. So what you're doing is you take Christianity and the core values and the core message, and you can modernize it in the way that you communicate it. But what a lot of these other churches, it sounds like, are doing are taking these kind of, you just have to be spiritual and you're okay, and then you put it in the context of a church, and that's appealing to people, but you lose the actual Christian message.
Right.
Ooh, that's good. So I just remembered because you said documentary again. So the mockumentaries.
Yeah.
Fred Armisen had a show that was like fake. I mean, it was mockumentaries.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Mm-hmm. It was on Netflix. I just remember I think I only watched the first one, and it was like this kind of like hoarder house or whatever. It's like this old house and this old lady who lived in there, played by Fred Armisen. But it's like, it got really weird really quick. Like at the end, I was like, "What just happened?" Because it got really scary. I was like, "Oh,
really?
This was not what I was expecting from this." Because apparently these old ladies were like trapping people in the basement. So they start killing the documentary makers. It was,
oh gosh,
it was crazy. Because you
just derailed this meaningful conversation.
Sorry. Well, because it goes back to the mockumentary things you're talking about. They're fun to watch.
What's real?
Sorry, I remember that. But all right. Is that real? No.
Is it real?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is long.
That
Yeah.
was a
Let us
good
know what you
stopping point.
blurred lines.
Yeah. So let us know in the comments, like, what's something that you watch or that you're like, oh, I don't know if this is real or not, but you enjoy partaking of it. So, all right. Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. I'm Chris.
I'm Adrian.
And I'm Jimmy.
And we'll see you next time.
Oh gosh.
I did it again.
Yeah.